So, my friend Emma and I have been close for almost a decade. We met at work years ago and just clicked. She's got this incredible personality. She's bubbly, ambitious, and lights up a room. I admire her drive so much. She's always pushing herself to the next level. But, like anyone, she's got her blind spots, especially when it comes to relationships. Emma has always had a bit of a pattern with the guys she dates. She tends to fall hard and fast for guys who don't seem to fully respect her. She's amazing and deserves the world, but it's like she can't see her own worth when she's in a relationship. She jumps in, gets overly invested, and overlooks red flags because she's so focused on making things work. A few months ago, she met this guy, Matt, at a networking event. He's successful, charming, and knows how to say all the right things. Emma was head over heels from the get-go, sending me texts about how Matt was different and how she could see a future with him. I was genuinely happy for her, but I admit I had a little nagging feeling. I'd met Matt once, and there was something about him that didn't sit right. He was polite, but there was this arrogance, this sense that he always had to be the smartest person in the room. It wasn't obvious, just a vibe I picked up. Over the weeks, Emma started confiding in me about some issues they were having. Matt would jokingly put her down in front of friends, or he'd make decisions for both of them without asking her. He'd go out with his friends and ignore her texts, then turn it around on her, saying she was being too clingy when she asked him to check in. She'd laugh it off, but I could tell it hurt her. I wanted to say something, but held back, hoping she'd realize it herself. Then, last week, we met up for coffee, and she looked defeated. She told me about how Matt had bailed on dinner with her family last minute, and when she'd asked why he hadn't even called, he told her she was overreacting and that she needed to stop being so needy. She admitted to me that she felt small and insecure around him, but then quickly defended him, saying he was just honest and that maybe she did have things she needed to work on. I couldn't listen anymore. I could see her breaking herself down to fit into this mold he'd created for her, and it made me sick. So I decided, right then and there, that I had to say something, even if it wasn't what she wanted to hear. I just couldn't stand by and watch her shrink herself for someone who didn't appreciate her. I took a deep breath and reached across the table. "Emma," I said gently, "I don't think Matt is treating you right." She looked at me surprised. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice cautious. I try to pick my words carefully. I see how much you care about him, and I know you want things to work out. But from what you've told me, it sounds like he's not really giving you the respect you deserve. She frowned, pulling her hand back. "He's just blunt. He tells it like it is. Isn't that what everyone says they want?" "Yes, but there's a difference between honesty and cruelty," I said, my heart pounding. "There's a line, and from what you're saying, it sounds like he's crossing it. You shouldn't feel like you have to change yourself to make him happy." Her face flushed, and I could see the defensiveness creeping in. "So, you think I'm weak for staying with him?" she asked, her voice tight. "No, that's not what I'm saying," I replied, trying to keep my tone calm. "I just think you deserve someone who lifts you up, who makes you feel good about yourself. It hurts to see you second-guessing everything about who you are because of him." She looked away, biting her lip. "You don't know him like I do. He's a good guy. I think I just need to toughen up." "Emma, it's not about being tougher." I was practically begging her to understand. "It's about finding someone who values you as you are, who doesn't make you feel like you're a burden just for wanting the basics of respect and kindness." She scoffed, shaking her head. "So, you think I should just break up with him? Just throw it all away because of a few rough patches?" "No, I'm not saying that. I don't want you to lose yourself in trying to make someone else happy. I don't want you to change who you are because he says it's not enough." She went quiet, looking down at her coffee. After a long pause, she sighed and finally met my gaze. "I know you think you're helping, but this is my relationship, not yours. You don't get to decide what's right for me." Her words stung, and I felt a knot form in my throat. "Emma, I'm saying this because I love you. I'm here for you no matter what. I just want you to be happy." She stood up abruptly, grabbing her bag. "I need to think about this," she muttered, her voice strained. Without another word, she turned and left the cafe, leaving me sitting there with my heart in my shoes, wondering if I'd just lost my best friend. The days that followed were brutal. I texted her a couple of times, but her replies were short, cold, like she didn't want to talk to me. I kept replaying that conversation in my mind, wondering if I'd gone too far or pushed too hard. Maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut and let her handle it. But then I'd remember the look in her eyes when she told me how Matt made her feel, and I'd convinced myself that I'd done the right thing. I didn't want to watch her get hurt. Then last night, she finally called me. Her voice was soft, hesitant. She told me she and Matt had gotten into a big fight and he'd stormed out. For the first time, she admitted that he had a way of making her feel like she was always the one in the wrong, and she said she didn't know what to do. I could hear the pain in her voice, and it broke my heart. I told her again that I loved her and that I'd be there for her, no matter what. We talked for hours, and by the end, I could tell she was starting to see things more clearly. But it was hard. She told me she didn't want to feel like a failure for letting go of a relationship she'd invested so much in. It started as a stupid, silly dare. My coworker and buddy, Tom, is the type of guy who loves to act like he's tough, unfazed by anything. He'd brag about how nothing scares me, nothing gets to me, always playing it cool. We have this running joke in the office that Tom's basically made of stone. So one Friday, I decided to see if I could shake him up a little. I put one of those tiny, wireless Bluetooth speakers in his desk drawer, hidden under some papers. I had control of it from my phone and planned to play a few creepy sounds throughout the day. You know, low whispers, faint knocking sounds, just subtle stuff that would make him wonder if he was hearing things. At first, it was funny. Tom kept glancing around, visibly confused but trying to keep his cool. I saw him get up and check the area around his desk a couple of times, peeking under his chair and muttering to himself. A few of our coworkers noticed and started giggling. Eventually, he caught on, found the speaker, and laughed it off, sort of. "Nice one," he said, giving me a look that was half amused, half annoyed. "Didn't know you had time to play Ghost." He laughed it off, but I could tell he was slightly irritated, especially when he saw the whole team chuckling. Still, I figured we were cool. The next Monday, I came in to find my entire desk turned upside down. Literally. My monitor was upside down, my mouse and keyboard were both covered in plastic wrap, and my chair was wrapped in several layers of aluminum foil. The whole team cracked up when I showed up, and Tom just leaned back, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. "Guess it's my turn," he said. I laughed it off, unwrapping everything, and told myself, okay, game on. I mean, if he wanted to turn it into a prank war, I wasn't going to back down. So, the next day, I snuck in early and messed with the settings on his computer to make everything display upside down. Every single icon, every window, it was all backward and mirrored. Tom took forever to figure it out, and when he did, he threw me a dark look. "That's low," he muttered. "You mess with my workflow." I could tell he was irritated, but it only fueled me more. That afternoon, I opened my desk drawer to find a mountain of those little plastic packing peanuts. I tried to clean them up, only to find they'd somehow been glued together in chunks. I had to scoop them out by hand, piece by piece, while Tom sat nearby, pretending to work but clearly loving every second of my struggle. The next day, I decided to mess with him in a way he wouldn't see coming. I swapped the M and N keys on his keyboard, since he was known for being a fast, almost robotic typist. The small, subtle change had him typing out nonsense words all morning until he finally figured it out. He glared at me, but I just shrugged. "All's fair," I said with a grin. I thought he'd let it go, but when I went to lunch, he struck back harder. I came back to find my phone, wallet, and all my pens stuck to my desk with super glue. My phone was practically cemented to my keyboard. I had to get IT to help me remove it, and by the time they managed to get it off without breaking it, everyone was staring, and the boss wasn't exactly pleased with the distraction. Tom just smirked and said, "Guess you won't mess with my keys again." Huh? But now I was angry. I mean, super glue? That was way over the line. So, I hatched a plan. Tom always left his desk to get coffee at exactly 10:15. So I waited for him to leave, then switched out his office chair with one that had a wobbly, broken wheel. When he got back, he sat down and nearly fell over as the chair gave out from under him. He managed to catch himself, but just barely, and for a moment, I thought he was going to lose it. He was red-faced, and I could tell I'd struck a nerve. "Not cool," he said, getting up and fixing his chair. That night, I got a text from Tom. "This has gone too far," he wrote. "Maybe you should quit before you get hurt." I couldn't tell if he was joking or serious, and maybe I should have listened, but I was in too deep to back out now. The next day, I found my entire workspace barricaded with stacks of file boxes. It took me 20 minutes to dig my way to my desk, sweating and fuming. That was it. I was done with subtlety. That afternoon, I snuck out and called a buddy from high school who runs a landscaping business. I arranged for them to deliver a massive load of mulch to the office parking lot, right where Tom's car was parked. I didn't expect them to literally dump it on top of his car, but when I got back from lunch and saw his car buried under a pile of mulch, I couldn't help but laugh. Until I saw Tom's face. He looked at his car, then back at me, his face pale. He wasn't angry. He was furious, silent in a way that honestly scared me. I knew I'd gone way too far. He didn't say anything to me, just walked past me, straight to the boss's office. 10 minutes later, I got called in. Turns out Tom had told him everything, including the part about my landscaping stunt. The boss was livid, saying the prank war had disrupted the entire office and that it was affecting productivity. He told us both to grow up and said if we couldn't act professionally, we'd both be looking for new jobs. I apologized to Tom, but he wouldn't even look at me, just muttered, "Yeah, whatever." I thought things would blow over, but they didn't. Tom barely talked to me after that, even though we'd been friends before. Now, every time I look over at his desk, I remember how all of this started with a harmless little Bluetooth speaker prank. What was supposed to be a bit of fun snowballed into a disaster that almost got us both fired. Maybe I should have stopped sooner. Maybe I was pushing too hard, and maybe the mulch on his car was way out of line. My mom's birthday was coming up, and we've been planning a family brunch for weeks. Nothing big. Just my parents, my brother, his wife, their 2 kids, and me. The plan was simple. Meet at my mom's favorite brunch place, eat, laugh, maybe walk around a bit. My mom's pretty easy to please, and I knew she was looking forward to it. But here's the thing. Her favorite brunch spot is this sleepy little cafe with barely anything on the menu beyond plain pancakes and eggs. No lattes, no fancy pastries, not even an avocado toast in sight. And there's no ambience either. It's like eating in a waiting room. I'd been there a few times, and well, it's just not my vibe. So, 2 days before her birthday, I got this idea. Why not go somewhere a little more exciting? I just discovered a trendy new place on the other side of town with a rooftop, live jazz, and a menu full of unique brunch options. Stuff like truffle omelets, matcha pancakes, and fancy pastries. I figured everyone would appreciate a place with more variety and an actual vibe. So I called the cafe, canceled the reservation, and booked us a table at the rooftop spot instead. I figured it'd be a great surprise. It's still brunch, just a bit more elevated. I didn't mention the switch to my mom because I thought she'd worry about things like the distance or whether everyone would like the food. I assumed once she saw the rooftop, she'd forget all about the old cafe and just be blown away by the wow factor. On the day of her birthday, we all showed up at her house, ready to head to brunch. As we're walking to the cars, she asked, "So, we're still going to the pancake spot, right?" And I just smiled and said, "Well, actually, I thought we'd try something a little different this year. You're going to love it, I promise." She seemed surprised, but she didn't say much. I could tell she wasn't exactly thrilled, but I figured she'd change her tune once we got there. The drive was about 20 minutes longer than the original place, and we got stuck in some traffic, but I was sure it'd be worth it once everyone saw how amazing this new place was. When we finally arrived, my mom looked up at the rooftop entrance and just said, "Oh, this wasn't quite what I was expecting." But I was too pumped to let her hesitation bother me. I told her to just wait till we got inside. Once we were seated, the vibe was perfect, exactly what I'd envisioned. There was a jazz duo playing in the corner, and the view from the rooftop was amazing. The kids were a little fidgety. They were promised pancakes, and now we were looking at a menu where even the simplest items had something fancy in them. But I figured they'd get excited once the food came. But the first little hiccup was the menu. My mom stared at it, a little bewildered. "They don't have plain eggs?" she asked. I laughed and pointed out the frittata with smoked Gouda or the eggs Benedict with truffle hollandaise. I figured she'd warm up to it if she just tried something new. Then my dad, who'd apparently missed breakfast because he was saving up for his favorite stack of pancakes, asked, "So, where are the pancakes?" I quickly told him they had these specialty matcha pancakes and a couple of French toast options. He just looked at me and said, "So no regular pancakes? Nothing plain?" I laughed again, telling him he just had to give these a try. How often did we get to eat on a rooftop with live music? But it didn't stop there. When my brother's kids got antsy, they asked for chocolate milk, and the waiter informed us they only served oat or almond milk. The kids looked horrified, and my sister-in-law muttered that she wished we'd stuck with a place that had more kid-friendly options. When the food finally arrived, I was thrilled. The presentation was stunning. But then my mom took a tiny bite of her frittata and put down her fork, not looking super enthusiastic. I asked her, "Mom, don't you love it? Isn't this place so much better than the pancake spot?" She looked at me with a sort of sad smile and said, "I appreciate you wanting to try something new, honey, but I actually really like the pancake spot. It's simple and comfortable, and I was looking forward to it." I felt my stomach sink a bit, but I tried to keep up my excitement, brushing it off as a little resistance to change. But isn't it nice to switch things up? We could do plain and simple any other weekend, right? I joked, trying to lighten the mood. That's when my dad chimed in. "It's not about plain and simple. It's about comfort." This was supposed to be her birthday, not your foodie adventure. I felt defensive right away. I mean, come on, can we just let loose a bit and appreciate the effort? I'm just trying to make it special for her. I shot back. "I didn't think you all would miss a greasy spoon cafe when you've got something like this." My brother looked over at me and said, "But you didn't even ask her. You just went ahead and decided on your own. It's her birthday, not yours." The whole table was quiet after that, and I could feel them all staring at me like I just ruined everything. I tried to laugh it off again, but by then it was pretty obvious nobody was enjoying themselves. The rest of brunch was mostly silence, interrupted by the kids whining about the weird pancakes and my mom politely picking at her meal without saying much. Afterward, on the way back, my mom sat in the car quietly while I drove, and finally she just said, "Thank you for trying, sweetheart, but I really just wanted a relaxing morning with everyone." Now, I'm starting to wonder if maybe I did mess it up. My brother called me later to say that next time, maybe I should stick with what people actually ask for instead of trying to make everything fancy. He also mentioned that my mom looked genuinely disappointed and kept mentioning that she'd been looking forward to her favorite spot for weeks. I honestly thought I was making it more special and thought they'd appreciate my creativity. I mean, I went out of my way to make it memorable, and I thought the extra effort would count for something. But apparently everyone's still talking about it, and now I'm not sure. Was it really that bad? I was just trying to make the day unique and memorable. So, AITA? Weeks have passed, and I still catch myself turning the whole thing over in my mind, each time realizing a little more about what I missed. I keep wondering how I managed to overlook something so simple, that sometimes it's not what's big or small to me, but what's meaningful to someone else. I keep thinking of Danny's message. "I just thought it would mean something to you to be there." That phrase sticks with me, running through my mind on repeat. At first, I shrugged it off as Danny being sensitive. I thought he'd get over it, that maybe he just needed a bit of time to cool down. But the truth is, I didn't give his feelings enough credit, and now I'm starting to feel the full weight of it. I've spent so long being casually dismissive about so many things, so many events, so many family gatherings, so many moments that I thought were trivial because, well, they didn't impact me. But this was different, and I missed that completely. And the thing is, deep down, I always knew Danny looked up to me. It's almost embarrassing to admit, but I'd been kind of used to that, to Danny's admiration and his easy loyalty. I always thought that would be enough to carry our connection. But now, I'm realizing that relationships need more than just good memories to stay alive. You actually have to show up, to be there even when it's inconvenient, even when it feels like just another routine milestone. I keep thinking of all those times growing up when Danny would show up for me without question. I'd had a terrible breakup in college, and he was one of the first people who reached out, driving 3 hours just to sit with me and distract me for the weekend. When I landed my first job out of college, Danny showed up to celebrate with me, even though it was just some entry-level office gig. I used to laugh at his endless encouragement, like he was some motivational speaker stuck on repeat. I never considered that he might have expected that support in return someday. Now, I got this gnawing feeling in my chest, a kind of heavy guilt I can't shake. Part of me wants to explain all of this to him, to let him know that I'm just realizing what I took for granted. But another part of me knows that I've already made my choice, and maybe it's too late to fix. I let my own view of what was important get in the way of seeing what he needed from me. I debated calling him, but I kept picturing his face, the look he might have if he picked up and heard me fumbling for words, trying to explain something that should have been clear to me from the beginning. Instead, I went through old photos of us together, all those goofy childhood pictures, sports games, family barbecues. In every single one, he's got that big grin, the kind that used to make me feel like he thought I was some kind of superhero. And I can't help but feel that I let that version of him down. In a last attempt to make amends, I sent him a letter, an actual letter, like the kind you write when texting just doesn't feel like enough. I told him that I was sorry for not being there, for not seeing his accomplishments the way he did, for assuming that he'd always just get over it if I wasn't around. I told him I understood if he needed space, but that I hoped someday we'd be close again, that we could get back to that place where he didn't have to question whether or not I cared. I haven't heard back yet, and I don't know if I ever will. Part of me thinks he'll forgive me eventually, that he'll realize I just had a blind spot I couldn't see until it was too late. But another part of me feels like this might be one of those things that leaves a scar. A reminder that you can't just brush people off when they're trying to share their lives with you. I keep telling myself it's a lesson learned, that next time I'll know better. But the damage is done, and every time I think about it, I wonder if I was the one who turned this into a big deal by not showing up when it mattered most. My boyfriend, Sam, and I had this genius idea to celebrate our anniversary by hosting a little backyard party. We're not usually big on grand gestures, but this year felt different. We'd made it through a lot together, new jobs, some family stuff, and moving into our first apartment, so a small celebration seemed like a fun way to mark it. And we were both tired of boring dinner dates, so we thought, why not make it a mini party? We split things up in a way that seemed perfectly reasonable in theory. I would handle the food and decorations, and he'd take care of entertainment and setting up the space, basically making sure we had enough chairs, some decent music, and maybe a few yard games. We'd done a couple of get-togethers with friends before, so I figured we'd both put in the usual effort and it'd be fine. I kept thinking, Sam loves parties, so he'll go all out on his end. I also felt like he'd naturally take charge of anything I might miss, since he's a bit of a perfectionist. Meanwhile, work was ramping up for me, so I was relieved to keep my part pretty basic. For my part, I picked up a few platters from a local deli, got a bag of charcoal for grilling, and grabbed some cheap balloons and string lights on sale. I figured we could throw together some burgers, hang the lights, and it would all look chill but cute. I assumed Sam was doing the same, adding some good music, arranging the yard for easy mingling, and maybe setting up his Bluetooth speaker so we wouldn't have to worry about the volume. I saw him scrolling on his phone a few times, and I just assumed he was looking at playlists or planning some kind of yard game. Honestly, I didn't think twice about it. So the big day rolls around, and Sam and I are running around separately for most of the day. I hung the lights haphazardly around the backyard, got some mismatched chairs set up, and threw together the deli platters. I was feeling pretty accomplished, so I sat down to relax before the guests arrived. Sam showed up about half an hour before the party, looking just as frazzled as I felt. When he walked into the backyard, his expression shifted to something between confusion and frustration. Where's all the food?" he asked. I gestured to the table, where the deli platters were just sitting there, still in their plastic. "Right there. We've got sliders, cold cuts, chips, and some salad. Plus, I got a few burgers we could throw on the grill later." His eyebrows shot up. "Are you serious? That's it? I thought you were making real food. Like, our anniversary food." Now I was the one getting annoyed. "Excuse me, but I thought you were handling the setup? You said you'd take care of the vibe, music, entertainment. Where's all that stuff?" He just stared at me, baffled. "I thought you were making more of an effort with, the decorations. And the food. You just threw deli stuff on the table?" At that point, it was painfully obvious we both phoned it in, each assuming the other would take the lead. Guests were due to arrive any minute, and the backyard looked more like an afterthought than the romantic anniversary setting we'd promised ourselves. Worse, there was no music. Sam hadn't even brought his speaker out, and the decorations were a few drooping balloons and tangled string lights that barely lit up. People started trickling in, offering us polite, hesitant smiles. Sam and I were still giving each other the side eye, trying to stay cordial. I grabbed a few beers and started passing them around, hoping the food would distract from the lack of atmosphere. But the awkwardness was thick, and I could see everyone noticing. One friend even tried to help by adjusting the lights and making a half-hearted joke about us having an intimate theme going on. An hour in, Sam pulled me aside, and we both just lost it. "Where's the special anniversary meal you said you'd make?" he whispered angrily. I was picturing some kind of charcuterie spread, maybe some hors d'oeuvres, something more than just cold cuts in plastic trays. "Well, where's the fun atmosphere you were supposed to set up? I thought we'd at least have a playlist and some chairs that match." "Oh, I thought you'd get it together." "I can't believe this is what you thought was enough," he shot back, his voice rising. A few guests turned to look, definitely picking up on the tension. We ended up practically hissing at each other behind a bush, each of us too stubborn to take any blame. Sam accused me of bare minimum effort, and I countered that he'd let me down with his totally lazy setup. By the end of the night, it was pretty clear our guests just wanted to leave. And honestly, I didn't blame them. The whole thing was the definition of a train wreck. People filtered out quickly, patting our shoulders on their way out with sympathetic looks, as if they were watching a bad reality show unravel in real time. After everyone left, Sam and I just stood there in the messy backyard, empty plates and half-finished drinks littering the table. He looked exhausted and disappointed, and I felt this horrible mix of guilt and resentment. Finally, he muttered, "I can't believe we turned this into this. I thought we were supposed to be celebrating. I wanted to say something to make it better, to bridge the weird, hurtful gap between us. But all I could manage was, well, I thought you'd at least try a little harder." We ended up cleaning up in silence, each of us too stubborn to apologize. Part of me knew I could have done more, but it felt unfair that he wasn't willing to admit he'd dropped the ball too. Now I'm left wondering if maybe I'm the one who messed up by assuming he'd handle it all. Alright, here's the story of how a $400 loan almost cost me my friendship with Sam. Sam and I have been friends for years. One of those ride or die kinds of friendships where you share everything from bad breakups to bad haircuts. So, when he asked me for a loan, I didn't think twice. He was in a bind. He just had a medical bill pop up and his paycheck was delayed. He needed $400 to make ends meet, and since I had a bit of savings, I figured I could help him out. He promised to pay me back by the end of the month. We didn't write anything down or set specific dates, which in hindsight was mistake number one. I just trusted that he'd come through. But here's where things started to get messy. The end of the month came and went and nothing. I kept waiting, thinking maybe he'd forgotten or just needed a few extra days. A few weeks went by, and I sent a gentle reminder. "Hey, any chance you'll be able to pay me back soon?" Sam responded right away, saying he was working on it and would get me the money as he. I figured that was that, but then I started noticing some things that made me uneasy. See, Sam loves posting on social media, and suddenly my feed was flooded with his weekend outings. Fancy dinners, concert tickets, some kind of wine tasting event. Each time, I'd get this sinking feeling, wondering how he could afford all that while still owing me $400. I didn't want to judge, but it felt strange. I was cutting back on my own spending, trying not to stress over the missing money while he was out living his best life. After a few more weeks, I decided to bring it up again. I texted him something like, "Hey, I know you've had a lot going on, but I'm really counting on getting that loan back soon. Think you could send a bit my way?" Sam left me on read for 2 days before finally replying with, "Look, I'm really trying here. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." "Okay." That response, that stung. I didn't even know how to react. As soon as I can sounded like code for "don't hold your breath." And meanwhile, I was supposed to just pretend I didn't need the money, but I bit my tongue and told myself to be patient. I mean, he was my friend, right? Then came the kicker. We were at a mutual friend's party, and Sam waltzed in with this huge, high-end speaker he'd bought for the occasion. I couldn't believe my eyes. He set it up, talking about how great the sound quality was and how he'd been saving up for it because life's too short not to enjoy good music. I couldn't believe it. I waited until we were alone in the kitchen and finally asked, "Sam, how can you buy something like that when you still owe me $400? He looked at me, exasperated, like I was being dramatic. He shrugged and said, "Come on, man, it was on sale." I couldn't pass it up, and I said I'd pay you back, didn't I? I tried to explain that it wasn't about the speaker. It was about feeling like he wasn't even trying to pay me back. I told him it felt like he was putting me at the bottom of his priorities, even though I'd helped him when he needed it. But he just rolled his eyes and said, Dude, you're making this into such a big deal. It's just $400. Relax. Just $400. Like it was nothing. But to me, it was a lot. I told him that if it was just $400, he could find a way to pay me back sooner rather than later. He huffed, calling me uptight and saying I was acting like some kind of debt collector. He went on to say he felt pressured and that I should just trust he'd get it to me. I couldn't hold back at that point. I reminded him that I'd been patient for 2 months, never made a scene, and only asked because I really needed the money. He laughed bitterly and said something like, "Maybe you shouldn't lend money if you're going to stress over it." That was it for me. I left the party feeling like a fool, wondering how a favor for a friend could end up making me feel like the bad guy. Since then, he's been cold, and I've barely heard from him. Mutual friends keep saying I'm being harsh and that I should just let it go, but I feel like they don't get it. This wasn't a small loan for me. It was $400 I really counted on getting back. So now I'm left wondering if I did something wrong. Did I overreact by asking for my money back? Or is he just taking advantage of my patience? It all started with a group chat, of all things. My mom, my sister Lydia, and I have this ongoing text thread where we swap everything from funny cat videos to family updates. So, when Lydia posted a picture of her car's dashboard, a check engine light glaring back at us, I didn't think much of it. She captioned it, "Guess my car's out to ruin my life now too." Perfect timing, right? Now, Lydia's sarcasm is basically a personality trait, so I laughed and replied with a haha classic. But the next few messages had me worried. She mentioned her hours got cut at work, and she didn't have enough saved to get the car fixed right away. I offered to help, like throw a little cash her way for repairs or cover the diagnostic fee. But she replied with, "No, I'll figure it out. Just venting. Thanks though." I let it go, but that weird feeling in my gut stuck around. A couple days later, I was at our mom's place for dinner, and Lydia was supposed to meet us there. Mom had set a pot roast on the table, all set for a nice family meal, but Lydia didn't show. I tried calling, but it went to voicemail. Eventually, she texted that she'd be late because she'd taken the bus. She mentioned something about making it work and how she needed some space to sort things out, but nothing specific. By then, my worry had gone from a mild itch to a full-on itch I couldn't ignore. It was clear things were tougher than she was letting on. The next morning, I stopped by her apartment unannounced. I know, maybe that wasn't the best move, but she hadn't answered my texts, and my mind had spiraled into worst-case scenarios. When she opened the door, she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled into a haphazard bun. She was surprised to see me, and her expression quickly turned wary. "Hey, everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep it casual. "You didn't show up last night, and I just wanted to check in." She nodded, stepping aside so I could come in. "Yes, sorry. I'm just dealing with a lot right now." Her tone was defensive, but I ignored it, figuring it was just stress talking. Then I noticed some open letters and a collection notice on her counter. I tried not to stare, but the overdue amount on her electric bill caught my eye. It was significant. My stomach dropped. Lydia had never mentioned any money problems, and I'd assumed she was doing okay. Seeing those overdue bills, combined with her cut hours and the car issues, suddenly painted a much darker picture. "Lydia, are you struggling with money?" I asked carefully. I saw the notice. "Is there something you need help with?" She went rigid, her eyes narrowing. "So, what, digging through my mail now?" "No, I just happened to see it there. It's hard not to notice when it's right in the open." I raised my hands defensively. "I'm only asking because I care. I didn't know things were this rough for you." She let out a frustrated breath, crossing her arms. "I'm fine. I don't need you to swoop in like some hero." "I'm not trying to swoop in," I said, struggling to keep my tone calm. I didn't know things were so tight for you, and I thought maybe I could help out a bit. You shouldn't have to go through this alone." Her expression was stony. "Well, maybe I don't want your help. Did that ever occur to you?" There was a bitter edge to her voice, and suddenly I felt like I'd stepped onto shaky ground I hadn't meant to tread. I tried again, softer this time. "Lydia, I know you're independent. I know you like handling things on your own, but sometimes there's no shame in letting people in. I just want to be here for you." She looked away, her arms crossing tighter over her chest. "Yeah, but sometimes people being there just makes things worse. It feels like you're saying I can't handle my own life. And I don't need that right now, okay. Her words cut deep, sharper than I expected. I'd only meant to offer support, but somehow, I'd become the bad guy, the meddler. The last thing I wanted was to make her feel less capable or like I was judging her. I thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe I hadn't considered how my help would feel to her, like a spotlight on her struggles, something she clearly didn't want. I swallowed hard, forcing a nod. All right, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overstep. I don't want you to be stressed alone. She just shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. I appreciate the thought, I guess, but I'll be fine. The drive home was quiet and lonely. I'd gone over there thinking I'd help her out, be the supportive sibling, but it all blew up in my face. Now I was left questioning everything. Was I wrong for trying to step in? Should I have just left it alone? Let her handle things in her own way, even if it meant struggling in silence? I genuinely thought I was doing the right thing, but maybe my idea of help just felt like pressure to her. Now I'm left wondering if I only made things worse by even trying. 3 months ago, I got a call from my old college friend, Nick. We hadn't talked in ages, but we were super close back in the day, practically inseparable. Apparently, he'd hit some bad luck. He'd lost his job, his girlfriend had kicked him out, and he didn't have anywhere else to go. He sounded desperate, and I could tell he was embarrassed just asking for help. Part of me hesitated. I'd heard from mutual friends over the years that Nick had drifted into some questionable habits, but he assured me he was getting his act together and just needed a place to crash for a month max. Well, I've always been the type to help a friend in need, so I told him he could stay in my guest room. I figured if it helped him get back on his feet, it'd be worth it. I cleaned the room, stocked up on groceries, and even dug out some extra blankets in case he got cold. Nick showed up with one battered suitcase, looking exhausted but grateful, and he thanked me over and over, saying I was a lifesaver. I'll admit it felt good. I thought, maybe this is exactly the kind of support he needs. The first week was pretty great. Nick was respectful, helped with dishes, even insisted on cooking a couple of meals. We'd stay up late talking about the good old days, laughing at dumb college stories, and he'd tell me all about his plans to find a new job, how he'd save up and get a place of his own. I thought, okay, this might actually work out. He seemed motivated, telling me about interviews he was scheduling and plans to apply at a few places around town. But as the second week rolled in, I noticed his enthusiasm fading. He started sleeping in late, sometimes until noon, and spent hours scrolling on his phone or watching shows. Whenever I asked how the job hunt was going, he'd give me vague answers like, I'm still working on it, or yeah, I'll get to it. I even printed out some job listings for him, which he barely glanced at before leaving them on the table. And then came the mess. He stopped cleaning up after himself, dishes piled up, food wrappers and cans were left all over the place, and he started taking over the bathroom with his stuff scattered everywhere. I'd step on wet towels on the floor or find empty shampoo bottles lying around. When I asked him to pick up after himself, he'd laugh it off, saying, "Oh, my bad. I'll get it," but he rarely did. Week 3 arrived, and he'd transformed the living room into his own personal lounge. My carefully organized books and magazines were all over the place. He'd leave his clothes on the couch, and he'd crank up the heat so high that I was sweating just sitting there. And don't even get me started on the fridge. Food was vanishing faster than I could restock. He'd devour leftovers I'd planned to have for lunch, and the milk was gone in 2 days flat. When I brought it up, he'd just say, "Oh, I thought we were sharing." It was honestly starting to feel like I was the guest in my own home. The turning point was when I came home from work one day and found Nick sprawled out on the couch, snoring, with a pile of empty beer cans on the table next to him. It looked like he'd had a mini party by himself while I was at work. When I woke him up and asked what was going on, he shrugged and mumbled something about just needing to unwind and asked if I could relax a little. I told him I was happy to help, but he'd have to be more respectful of the space. He rolled his eyes, muttered, "Sure, whatever," and went back to his nap. By the end of the month, I was starting to feel like a full-time babysitter. Every time I'd remind him about a job application or ask if he'd heard back from any interviews, he'd get defensive, saying things like, "It's not that easy out there," or "I'm trying, okay?" He acted as if I was asking for something unreasonable, like I wasn't already covering all the groceries, utilities, and rent while he drifted through my apartment, seemingly doing nothing. When I finally sat him down and asked about his plan to move forward, he lost it, He accused me of breathing down his neck and making him feel unwelcome. He actually said I was holding him to an impossible standard and acting like he was freeloading, which at that point, well, it wasn't totally untrue. I tried to keep it calm, explaining that I'd expected him to contribute, even a little, and he fired back with, "Wow, so it's all about money to you? I thought we were friends." I couldn't believe it. I reminded him that I'd been covering everything so he could focus on getting back on his feet. And he said, "I didn't realize there was a price tag on friendship." It felt like a punch in the gut. This was the same guy who'd practically begged me for help a month ago, and now he was accusing me of being transactional? Since that blow-up, Nick's been sulking around the apartment, giving me the silent treatment. He's still eating my food, lounging on my couch, and leaving a mess everywhere he goes. But now there's this cloud of resentment hanging over everything. I've tried hinting that he might want to consider finding another place soon, but he acts like I'm betraying him for even suggesting it. I've even dropped a few jokes about rental listings I found for him, but he just brushes it off, saying he's not ready to move yet. It's gotten to the point where I'm actually dreading going home. I'm the one who feels like a guest now, tiptoeing around his mood swings, avoiding confrontations, and honestly starting to question my own sanity. I don't know if I was too harsh, or if maybe I just let it go too long without saying anything. So now I'm left wondering if I'm the jerk here. Was I wrong to ask him to start thinking about moving on? Or is he just pushing me to see how much I'll put up with? My friend Mark was having a tough year. His startup had hit some major snags. He'd just gone through a rough breakup, and on top of that, he was balancing a ton of family issues. We've been close since college, and I could tell he was struggling even though he wouldn't admit it. He was one of those everything's fine guys who never really opened up about his feelings, but I knew that beneath that facade, he was drowning. So I decided to organize a surprise party for his birthday, a way to remind him he was surrounded by people who cared. I thought if he wouldn't lean on us willingly, maybe this would coax him out of his shell. I started planning a few weeks in advance, coordinating with his friends, inviting people we hadn't seen in a while, and booking a cozy lounge where we could have drinks, food, and even play some pool. I made sure it was laid back because I knew he'd hate anything over the top. I even invited his family. His sister came in from out of town, and his dad, who's usually reserved, was excited about surprising him. I was buzzing with excitement on the day of the party, imagining how happy he'd be when he walked in to find all these people there for him. When the night came, everything was perfect. The decorations were up, drinks were flowing, and everyone was there, waiting for him. He thought we were just grabbing a quick dinner, so I'd arranged for him to pick me up at the venue. When we walked in, everyone shouted, "Surprise!" and he froze, staring at the crowd like he was in a horror movie. I thought he'd snap out of it once he realized it was for him, but he stayed quiet, his expression unreadable. I gave him a nudge and laughed, saying, "Happy birthday, man. You deserve a good time." But instead of relaxing, he pulled me aside and asked if we could talk outside. My stomach dropped, but I followed him, still thinking he'd probably just gotten overwhelmed and needed a second to regroup. As soon as we got outside, he turned to me, looking tense. "Why would you do this without asking me?" he said, his voice low but controlled. I was taken aback. "What do you mean? I thought you'd love it. You've been under so much stress, and I figured this was a way for you to unwind. You've been so isolated, and all these people came just for you." He shook his head, his jaw clenched. "You don't get it, do you? I don't want all this attention right now. I'm barely holding it together, and the last thing I need is to feel like I'm on display. You think this helps?" I was floored. I had spent weeks planning, calling, and coordinating, all for him, only for him to see it as some kind of ambush. "Mark, I thought this would remind you that you're not alone. I know things have been hard, and I just wanted to lift your spirits. It's not like anyone here expects you to put on a show." He sighed, looking away. But that's exactly what it feels like. I've barely talked to most of these people in months, and now they're here, probably expecting me to pretend everything's fine. Did you even think about what I wanted? I could feel my frustration rising. Of course I thought about what you'd want. You've been shutting everyone out, and we're all worried about you. This was a way to bring you back to yourself, to show you that you've got people who care about you. He just shook his head, looking almost hurt. But did you consider for a second that maybe I just needed space? That I wasn't ready for this? You decided this would make me feel better, but you never even asked what I wanted. You made this whole night about what you thought was best. That hit hard. I'd gone out of my way to make sure the night would be something he'd enjoy. I'd made it as chill and low-key as possible, specifically for him. And now he was acting like I'd done it all for myself, like I was being selfish for trying to help. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the hurt slipping through. Look, I'm sorry if this wasn't what you wanted, but I just wanted to remind you that you're loved. We all care about you. I wasn't trying to make you uncomfortable. He just nodded, but he looked like he was barely holding back anger. I know you meant well, but sometimes good intentions don't cut it. I've been dealing with things my way, and you just swooped in, thinking you knew better. That's not support, it's control. With that, he turned and walked back inside, leaving me standing out there in the cold, feeling more foolish than I'd ever felt. I could hear laughter and music through the door, but I couldn't bring myself to go back in. I tried to do something good for my best friend, something I thought he'd appreciate, only to end up accused of trying to control him. I don't know. Maybe I misread the whole situation, but it feels like I put in so much effort and thought only to have it thrown back in my face. So now I'm left wondering, am I really the bad guy here for trying to... This whole thing started because my best friend asked me to be her maid of honor. That sounds great in theory, right? Best friends, big day, lots of joy and excitement. But I knew from the start it was going to be a nightmare. My friend, bless her, is the definition of high maintenance. She's got this vision for a perfect wedding, and everyone involved is just a piece in her grand plan. I should have known better, honestly, but she'd done the whole maid of honor thing for me a couple of years ago, so I felt like I owed her. At first, I tried to be enthusiastic, went to the initial dress shopping, helped her pick colors, and nodded along when she was obsessing over whether the napkin should be cream or ivory. But as the months went on, her demands kept piling up. Every other week, it seemed like she needed me for something. Bridesmaid dress fittings, meetings with florists, pre-wedding photo shoots, brunches with her future in-laws. Then came the all-hands-on-deck bachelorette party she wanted, a whole weekend event that required endless planning, coordinating, and more money than I had ever anticipated spending. Here's the thing. I work a stressful job, and all these wedding-related events were chipping away at my already limited free time. I'd have to leave work early, reschedule meetings, or sacrifice my weekends to keep up with it all. And every time I tried to suggest that maybe she could delegate some of this to other bridesmaids, she'd give me this disappointed look, like I was personally letting her down. I started dreading every call, every new request, because it was just one more thing she needed from me. Then, about 3 weeks before the wedding, she called me with her latest request. She wanted all of the bridesmaids to spend the whole week leading up to the wedding at her place. Her reasoning? She wanted everyone nearby to help with last-minute details and to bond before the big day. But I had work that week, deadlines piling up, and to be honest, I was barely keeping up as it was. I told her I couldn't take a full week off to stay at her place, but I'd be there for the rehearsal dinner and everything afterward. Her response? She completely lost it. She said I was being selfish, that this was her once-in-a-lifetime moment, and that she couldn't believe I was prioritizing work over our friendship. It turned into a long, dramatic phone call where she told me I was letting her down, that she'd been there for me through everything, and that it wouldn't kill me to just be there. I felt like I was drowning in guilt, but the truth was I was exhausted. It wasn't fair for her to expect me to drop everything in my life just because she'd chosen to go full bridezilla. So I did something that probably makes me sound terrible. I pulled back. I'd been there for her every step of the way, but that was it for me. I needed a break. I stopped replying immediately to her texts, didn't jump at every call, and skipped a couple of the minor wedding prep events. I told her I'd still be there for the rehearsal dinner, the actual wedding, and whatever was truly essential, but that I couldn't keep this pace anymore. She was clearly upset, but I figured that would be the end of it. Then, a week before the wedding, she called me, again in tears, and said she'd heard I wasn't as involved as I should be. Apparently, some of the other bridesmaids had been talking about how checked out I seemed, and she said she was disappointed in me and needed to know if I was really going to be there for her. I was fuming. Here I was trying to salvage my own life and sanity, and now I was being painted as the bad guy. I told her flat out that I was doing the best I could, and that it wasn't fair for her to expect so much. On the actual wedding day, I showed up, smiled through the photos, and did my maid of honor duties. I gave a nice speech, handed her tissues during her vows, and held her dress so she could be everything that's expected. But there was this tension between us, this weird, lingering bitterness that made it feel like all my efforts still weren't enough. After the wedding, she barely talked to me. A few days later, she sent this long message about how hurt she was that I hadn't been present for her in the way she'd imagined. She told me she'd always thought we were closer than this, and that it was heartbreaking to realize she'd misjudged our friendship. Her words stung, but a part of me couldn't help thinking, wasn't she the one who'd misjudged? She'd expected me to sacrifice everything, my time, my mental health, my own life, to meet her endless expectations. I'd done everything I could, but somehow it was still my fault that she'd been let down. Now, our friendship feels broken. She hasn't returned my last few messages. And when we run into mutual friends, there's this awkwardness, like everyone knows she's mad at me. I can tell people are talking about it, probably taking sides, but honestly, I don't even know if I care anymore. I'm exhausted from bending over backward for her only to be painted as the villain because I had the nerve to set a boundary. The minute I told my girlfriend Mia about the job offer in Seattle, I saw the spark go out in her eyes. We'd been together for 5 years, and she was my best friend, my confidant, the person I pictured when I thought about the future. But when I brought up the new job, her expression told me everything I didn't want to hear. Seattle, she said, her voice just barely holding back her disappointment. I thought you were happy here. We talked about settling down. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep eye contact. I am happy here, with you. But this job, Mia, it's exactly what I've been working toward. It's a huge step up, and I'd be managing my own team. You know how rare something like this is. Mia took a deep breath, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. But why Seattle? That's 3,000 miles away, Jake. That's not just another job change. That's us being apart, and I don't know if I can handle that. I hadn't expected her to be thrilled, but I also hadn't anticipated just how hard it would hit her. Mia and I had built a life together in Boston. We had our favorite little neighborhood spots, a tight-knit group of friends, and a rhythm to our lives that made everything feel right. But I'd also felt that familiar restlessness, a sense that I was meant for something more. Mia, I don't want to leave you behind, I said, reaching for her hand. I'd love it if you came with me. We can start fresh, explore a new city together. Think about it, the mountains, the coffee shops, the coastline. We'd be together, just somewhere new. Her lips tightened, and she looked down, avoiding my gaze. It's not that easy for me, Jake. My family's here. My job is here. And my life is here. I thought our life was here. Her words cut deep. Part of me wanted to just say, forget it, I'll stay, and let the job go. But I also knew that a chance like this wasn't going to come along again. I'd been grinding away, working for this exact opportunity for years, and turning it down felt like burying a piece of myself. We sat there, a heavy silence hanging between us, each of us struggling to understand the other. I know it's a lot, I said finally, my voice quieter now. And if you don't want to come with me, I get it. But can you at least consider it? Just think about what it could mean for us, for me. She looked up, her eyes a mix of sadness and frustration. You're asking me to leave everything behind, Jake. You're asking me to give up my career, my friends, my family, all for something I don't even want. I'm happy here. I thought you were too. I am happy here, I insisted, feeling a knot form in my chest. But I can't shake this feeling, Mia. I need to do this. I need to see what's out there, to see what I'm capable of. This isn't just some random job. It's the chance of a lifetime. She nodded slowly, pulling her hand away. And where does that leave us? I didn't have a good answer for that. The thought of going to Seattle without her was painful, but so was the idea of staying behind and wondering every day if I'd made a mistake. I didn't want to choose between the woman I loved and the career I dreamed of, but here I was, backed into that corner. Mia, I said, my voice cracking a little. I love you. I don't want to lose you, but I also don't want to live with regrets. Can we find a way to make it work? Maybe I go, just for a year, and we do long distance, and then if it's not working, I'll come back. Or maybe you'll want to join me by then. We could find a way to make it work, couldn't we? Her face softened, but I could still see the doubt in her eyes. Long distance, she repeated, almost as if she was tasting the words and finding them bitter. Is that really how you want us to be? Living apart? Visiting each other when we can squeeze it in? It's not ideal, but it's something, I said, reaching out for her hand again. I'd rather try that than give up on us completely. I know it's not what you wanted, and it's not what I wanted either, but I don't see another way. I can't give this up, Mia. I need to do this, and I need you to understand that. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. I could tell she was fighting back tears, and that sight made my chest ache. Jake, I get it, she said softly, opening her eyes and looking at me with a mixture of love and resignation. I get that this means everything to you, but I have to be honest. I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I can just sit here, waiting, wondering if you're going to come back, or if you're going to find a new life there that doesn't include me. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle in my gut. I wanted to promise her that I'd come back, that we'd make it work, but I didn't know if I could make that promise. What if I fell in love with Seattle? What if she met someone new here while I was gone? We'd been inseparable for so long that the idea of drifting apart was unthinkable. And yet, here we were, on the verge of exactly that. I don't want to lose you, I said, feeling the lump in my throat grow. But I don't know how to choose, Mia. This job, it's something I've wanted forever. And you're someone I want forever. Why does it feel like I can't have both? She let out a shaky sigh, reaching out and touching my cheek gently. Because sometimes we can't, Jake. Sometimes life makes us choose. And I don't want you to stay here out of guilt. If you're going to resent me for holding you back, that's not fair to either of us. I closed my eyes, leaning into her touch, savoring the warmth. This was the woman I wanted by my side, the person I'd imagined growing old with. And yet, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward Seattle, toward the unknown. So, where does that leave us? I whispered, feeling the tears sting at the back of my eyes. She looked away, and her voice was barely a whisper. I think it leaves us in different places, Jake. Maybe it's for the best. You go, see what's out there. And if we're meant to be together, we'll find a way back to each other. The finality of her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I'd known, deep down, that this might be where things would end, but hearing her say it out loud made it all too real. I wanted to beg her to reconsider, to tell her that I'd stay, that I'd do anything to keep us together. But I knew that would just lead to resentment, to a lifetime of what-ifs. We both deserved more than that, even if it hurt like hell in the moment. I love you, Mia, I said, my voice thick with emotion. And if there's any way we can make this work, I'll be here. I'll come back. Just remember that. She gave me a sad smile, wiping a tear from her cheek. I love you too. That's why I want you to go, Jake. To find whatever it is you're looking for. We sat there for a while, holding hands, each of us knowing that we were saying goodbye in some way. Eventually, I got up to leave, and the weight of it all felt almost unbearable. This was what I wanted, or at least what I thought I wanted. But as I walked out the door, leaving her behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing something far more important than a job opportunity. And now, here I am, ticket in hand, trying to convince myself that this is the right decision. But in the back of my mind, all I can think is, all right, here we go. My fiancé, Alex, and I are officially 3 weeks away from moving to our new place. And while this is supposed to be an exciting milestone, it's starting to feel like we're gearing up for battle. Not against each other exactly, but against our very different approaches to, well, everything. To paint the picture, I'm the type of person who thrives on checklists, timelines, and pre-ordered moving supplies. I like knowing what's going to happen, when, and how, so I can check it off and feel like I'm keeping us on track. There's just something satisfying about planning everything out in advance, so I know we're not overlooking anything. I already have folders on my laptop with budget breakdowns, lists of packing priorities, and even a color-coded spreadsheet detailing what should go in each room in the new place. Alex, on the other hand, has a wait-and-see attitude about, well, pretty much everything. To him, planning each step in detail is just stress we don't need. He figures that as long as we have the basics, packing boxes, movers booked, and an address, we'll sort the rest out as it comes. It's not that he's lazy, exactly. He's just so casual about the whole thing. He keeps telling me that he wants to enjoy the process, and that everything will fall into place. And I'm over here like, are we living on the same planet? So, here's where it all started to go sideways. I'd spent a whole Saturday researching moving companies and had finally found one with decent rates and great reviews. Excited, I brought it up to Alex that night over dinner. Hey, I found a really reliable moving company that has a perfect date available for us. I told him, practically glowing with accomplishment. If we book them now, we won't have to worry about it later, and we'll have a guaranteed spot. Alex gave me that calm, laid-back smile, the one he uses when he thinks I'm being extra, and just shook his head. Babe, it's way too early to book movers. Let's just wait a week or two and see what other options pop up. No need to rush. I just stared at him, half expecting him to say he was kidding. Too early? Alex, if we wait, we could end up scrambling and stuck with terrible options. Then we'll have no one to blame but ourselves. He shrugged, as if that outcome was no big deal. Even if we book later, we'll find someone. There's no point in stressing ourselves out over it now. And that's pretty much been the theme of our conversations for the last 2 weeks. I'm pushing to lock down the big details, like movers, storage options, and apartment cleaning arrangements, while he thinks we should relax and let things fall into place naturally. Every time I try to get him on board with my planning, he gives me a reassuring smile and says something like, just take it easy, it'll all work out, which honestly drives me crazy. He might as well say, your planning is pointless. We're trying to meet each other halfway, but it feels like we're each standing on our own cliff. I agreed to stop pestering him about the movers for a bit, but every day that goes by without a booking confirmation, I feel this anxious itch creeping up. I don't want to end up the day before the move, frantically calling moving companies only to find they're all booked. On his end, Alex is trying to support my planning by at least going over the packing list with me, even if he thinks it's way too early to start labeling boxes. One night, he actually got out some packing tape and labeled a few kitchen boxes for me, clearly just to make me feel better. I could tell he was trying to be patient, but he kept making little comments like, we could just throw this all in a few big boxes and call it a day. My heart nearly stopped. I couldn't believe he actually thought that. Throw it all in? We'd never be able to find anything later. I protested, horrified. If we don't organize it now, unpacking will be a nightmare. He gave me an amused smile and leaned back against the counter. Or we could just figure it out as we go along and save ourselves the stress. Sometimes things work out better when you don't overthink them. It was like we were speaking two different languages. To me, figuring it out as we go sounded like a surefire recipe for chaos. I try to picture myself just tossing everything into random boxes and hoping for the best, and the mental image alone was enough to give me an anxiety attack. But for him, my structured approach just seemed like overkill, like I was setting us up to fail by making the whole thing a bigger deal than it needed to be. The other night, we tried talking about it again. I'd put together a rough timeline for packing so that we wouldn't end up cramming everything into the last few days. And I showed it to him, hoping he'd see the benefit of my method. Look, I explained, if we pack up a few things each day, it won't feel like a huge rush at the end. We'll be able to focus on the essentials instead of scrambling around. He chuckled, shaking his head. It's a nice plan, babe, but isn't it kind of, a little much? Why not just dedicate the last weekend to packing everything? It'll take, a day or two tops? I honestly felt like I was talking to someone from another universe. Alex, it's not just a day or two when it's our entire apartment. What if we get to moving day and half of our stuff is still sitting around unpacked? Then we pack it up that day. Worst case scenario, it'll take us a few extra hours. We'll get it done either way. I could see he was trying to reassure me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he just wasn't taking this seriously enough. He seemed so unconcerned, like we were just moving down the street and not halfway across the country. I wanted to relax and trust his laid-back attitude, but the fear of ending up in a moving day disaster kept gnawing at me. We tried to compromise. He agreed to let me handle the packing strategy as long as I didn't book anything or set any hard deadlines without running it by him first. I thought maybe this would help, that I could ease into his flexible approach while still keeping a few things organized. But it's been hard to let go of that control. I keep picturing us living out of half-unpacked boxes for months because we were too chill about the whole thing. Alex, meanwhile, is making an effort to be supportive, but I can tell he's barely holding back his eye rolls every time I bring up a new detail I want to nail down. He even joked, "If this is how much you stress about moving, I can't wait to see you planning our wedding." I laughed it off, but honestly, the comment stung. It felt like he was brushing off my whole approach, like he couldn't see why this mattered so much to me. So, here we are, still stuck in this limbo of trying to merge two totally different ways of handling a major life change. I'm doing my best to take it easy like he keeps suggesting, but I can't shake the nagging feeling that my way is the only way to make sure we're prepared. Every time I try to go with the flow, I picture us scrambling on moving day, stressed and exhausted, and it makes me want to grab my checklist and triple check everything. Alex is convinced I'm stressing myself out for no reason, that things will go smoother if we just let them happen. But I can't help thinking that if I don't stick to my planning, we'll regret it later. Maybe I'm too uptight, or maybe he's too relaxed, but I can't tell which one of us is actually right. So, here's the scene. My boyfriend, Ben, and I have been talking about going to this big music festival for ages. It's a 3-day camping event with some of our favorite bands, plus tons of food trucks, art installations, and late-night DJ sets. Honestly, it's been a dream of mine to go for years. Ben's not a big festival guy, but he agreed, mostly because he knew how much it meant to me. We've been dating for over a year, and I thought, hey, maybe this will be the ultimate bonding experience. The closer we got, though, the more I noticed Ben's indifference, let's say, towards actually planning for the trip. He'd say things like, "It's a festival, we'll just go with the flow," or "Isn't the whole point to be spontaneous?" He didn't want to discuss schedules, what we'd need to bring, or even which bands he wanted to see. Meanwhile, I was watching packing guides, checking off a list of things to bring. There's a lot involved, in planning which bands and events I wanted to catch each day. One night, I showed him my plan. I'd organized everything. The acts I really wanted to see, the sets I thought he'd enjoy, food spots to try, and even times for resting back at the tent. But he just laughed. "You're kidding, right? You can't schedule a festival, babe." I laughed it off, but I couldn't help feeling frustrated. This wasn't just a day at the park. It's a 3-day festival in the middle of nowhere with a lot of crowds, noise, and walking. To me, a bit of organization would make it smoother, especially since Ben had never done anything like this before. Fast forward to the night before we leave, and I realize Ben hasn't packed anything. I'm talking nothing. He even had to ask if he should bring sunscreen. I pointed to the pile of stuff I'd packed for myself. Water bottles, sunscreen, hats, a mini first aid kit, snacks, a power bank, the works. He smirked. "That's overkill. Just bring what you need to survive. You know, basic camping stuff? It'll be fine." Annoyed, I packed my things and figured he'd figure it out on his own. If he was going to be that casual, so be it. We finally got there, set up camp, and by mid-morning on day one, I could already see him struggling. He was overheating, hungry, and tired from all the walking. I meanwhile had my little collapsible chair, snacks, and a schedule so I didn't feel like I was sprinting between stages. He was constantly asking where we were going next, and it became painfully obvious he hadn't even glanced at the festival map. But did he ask for help? Nope. He kept shrugging it off, acting like he was chill, even though he looked miserable. Finally, in the afternoon, I couldn't hold back anymore. I sat him down and tried to go over my plan for the day. He rolled his eyes and said, "Look, I get it, you're organized, but I'm here to experience the festival, not stick to a list. I didn't realize you'd turn this into some kind of itinerary prison." That stung, especially because I'd put so much effort into planning a fun experience for both of us. So I said, "Fine, if you're so set on being spontaneous, go for it. Let's split up, do our own thing, and meet back here at the tent tonight. That way, we both get what we want." I thought maybe a little solo time would help him see how chaotic it could be without any kind of plan. He looked surprised, but agreed. So we went our separate ways, and I'll admit, I felt a little thrill of victory. For the rest of the day, I was in my element, catching the sets I wanted, trying different food, even meeting a couple of new people who were totally on the same page as me. I was having an incredible time, thinking I'd check back in with Ben in a few hours to find he'd gotten lost or was already begging to join me. But when I got back to the tent that evening, there he was, lounging on a camp chair he'd borrowed from some other group, looking totally content. "How was your day?" he asked with a smile that seemed almost smug. I told him I'd had a great time, and then casually asked, "So, how'd it go without a plan?" He shrugged. "Amazing. Actually, I just wandered around, did my own thing. Ended up at this silent disco with some other people, and it was one of the best nights I've had in a while." I felt a mix of relief and annoyance. Here I was, expecting him to admit he'd struggled without a plan, but instead, he'd apparently had a blast. But it wasn't over yet. Day 2 was where things started to unravel. Without consulting me, he decided we should go with some people he'd met to check out a DJ set at a stage on the opposite side of the grounds. "You'll love it," he said, like he'd suddenly become the expert on festival fun. I tried to explain that we'd missed the set we'd originally planned to see, one of my favorites, but he just brushed me off with, "We're here to go with the vibe, remember?" I ended up tagging along, trying to keep an open mind, but the whole time I was annoyed, feeling like he was just making random choices to prove a point. By the time we finally got back to the main stage, the set I'd wanted to see was over. I felt a little wave of bitterness hit me. I'd spent so much time planning, just to be dragged around and miss the one act I cared about most. That night, I told him I was done. I didn't spend all this time planning and saving up just to miss out because you suddenly feel like playing Mr. Spontaneous. Tomorrow, I'm sticking to my plan. He gave me this look like I was being dramatic. "Look, if this whole thing is that serious to you, maybe we should have just gone separately. You don't have to control everything to have a good time." Now, I was furious. This wasn't about controlling everything. It was about making sure we both had a good time, not just wandering aimlessly. But since you're so against any structure, maybe you're right. Maybe I should just do this solo. Ben didn't argue. He just nodded a bit too quickly for my liking and said, "Fine. See you at the tent tomorrow night, then." The last day was pure spite-fueled independence. We didn't even talk until that night, when we met back at the tent. I expected at least an apology, or maybe for him to admit he'd been frustrated without some kind of plan. But instead, he just smiled and said, "Guess it all worked out, huh?" And that was it. 3 days of barely speaking, missed sets, and us both doing our own thing. We left the festival feeling like strangers, all because we were both too stubborn to compromise. I felt like he'd ruined the experience, but I'm sure he'd say the same thing about me. Now I'm sitting here trying to figure out if I went too far with the planning, or if he just couldn't handle having a girlfriend who actually enjoys a bit of structure. Alright, so this all went down last weekend at my friend Emily's engagement party. Emily and I have known each other since college, and I'm genuinely happy for her, but I don't think I did anything wrong here, even though she and some of our friends are acting like I'm some kind of monster. The night started off great. Emily and her fiancé Matt were making the rounds, and everyone was in full celebratory mode. Emily and Matt have been together for a few years, and while they're cute and all, let's just say they've had their ups and downs. Matt's a nice enough guy, but let's be real, he's not exactly Prince Charming. So when they announced their engagement, I was happy for them, but not exactly blown away. It just felt like, okay, that's nice. Anyway, Emily was telling the group about Matt's proposal. How he took her on this big surprise weekend to a cabin by a lake and proposed under the stars. Everyone was swooning, and I get it, that's a sweet story. But I'd just gotten out of a pretty serious relationship myself, and the breakup was rough. Not to brag, but my ex and I had a way more intense, passionate relationship than what Emily and Matt have. So when she was done, I said, that's so sweet, Em. It reminds me of the time I went to Big Sur with Jake, and he set up this whole romantic dinner under the stars too. It was like something out of a movie. I thought I was just adding to the conversation. I didn't even mention the breakup. I just wanted to show that I understood how magical those moments can feel. Emily gave me a bit of a strained smile, though, and one of our friends, Jess, leaned over and said, "Maybe tonight we can just focus on Emily and Matt's story?" I thought she was joking, so I laughed and said, "Of course. I was just saying I get how amazing those moments are." But from there, things just kept getting weirder. Later, Emily's mom came over and started talking to me about how excited she was for Emily to start the next chapter. I tried to be polite, so I nodded and said, "Absolutely. It's always a big step." But then I couldn't resist adding, when I was with Jake, we talked about getting married too, but I guess it just wasn't our time yet. It was true. We'd been close to engagement at one point, and I just wanted her mom to know I understood what a big deal it was. The vibe got awkward fast. Emily's mom went kind of quiet, then just smiled politely and excused herself. I didn't think much of it, but now I realize she must have gone to Emily right after, because Emily was suddenly giving me some serious side-eye from across the room. I was honestly confused. I mean, yes, it was Emily's night, but what's wrong with mentioning my own experiences? It wasn't like I was trying to steal the spotlight. I was just relating to her excitement. A little while later, I found myself in a conversation with Matt and some of the other guys, and they were talking about the wedding plans. I knew Emily had always wanted a winter wedding, so I asked if they'd picked a date. And I was like, yeah, we're thinking December, and everyone was super enthusiastic. So I threw in, oh, I love winter weddings. I had this Pinterest board with so many winter wedding ideas back when Jake and I were planning. They're so romantic. Matt kind of nodded awkwardly, and the other guys were silent for a second before one of them chuckled and said, so, were you going to ask her to marry you or something? I laughed it off, saying, hey, I like to be prepared. But I noticed Matt looked a little uncomfortable, so I just dropped it and went to get a drink, wondering if maybe I'd said a little too much. But come on, I was just talking. Later that evening, I went to find Emily to apologize for maybe bringing up my own stuff too much. But before I could even say anything, she looked at me and said, look, can you just not make this about you tonight? I felt taken aback. I told her, I'm really happy for you, Em. I was just saying that I understand how special this is for you. But she sighed and said, you keep bringing up Jake and all these plans you supposedly had with him. It's weird, and it feels like you're trying to one-up everything tonight. One-up her? I was honestly shocked. I told her, I'm just sharing my own experiences. Isn't that what friends do? She just looked at me, and I could see she was frustrated. She goes, this is supposed to be about me and Matt, and every time I look over, it's like you're giving this subtle reminder about Jake. It's like you can't just let me have this moment. I couldn't believe it. All I'd done was mention a few things from my own relationship. A relationship that was honestly more passionate than what she and Matt have. Not that I'd ever say that to her face. I try to defend myself, saying, I wasn't trying to take anything away from you, Em. I'm happy for you. I just thought you'd want me to join in the excitement. But she just shook her head and said, maybe next time. Just let it be about me, okay? So, now I'm honestly wondering if I was somehow wrong to even mention my own relationship. I didn't see it as making it about me. I was just sharing my experiences, and isn't that what friends do? I wasn't trying to steal her thunder. I just thought we could all celebrate love and big life moments together. But apparently, now I'm this self-centered one? I don't know, maybe she was just stressed out with all the wedding planning and took it out on me. I didn't think there was anything wrong with adding my own stories to the conversation, but was I somehow out of line? Benny, my golden Labrador, has been with me for almost 14 years. I remember the day I picked him up as a wobbly, oversized puppy who looked like he'd trip over his own paws. Now, he's my constant companion, my best friend, my first kid. He's been with me through job changes, my parents' divorce, a string of relationships, and finally, when I met Kayla, who he loved immediately. So when Benny started limping a few months ago, I thought it was just old age catching up. But the limp got worse, and then he started having trouble standing up. After some blood tests, scans, and a biopsy, the vet gave us the news. A tumor on his leg, aggressive and spreading fast. Our vet was sympathetic but blunt. If we wanted to treat it, Benny would need surgery to amputate the leg and then chemotherapy. Without treatment, he might have only a few more months. I felt the answer immediately. We have to do this surgery, right? The thought of losing him, of just letting him go without fighting, felt impossible. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. He's 14, sure, but he's still Benny. Alert, sweet, and devoted. I couldn't look at him lying on the exam table, his big brown eyes peering up at me, and not feel like he deserved every possible chance to stay with us. But Kayla was quiet. She kept stroking Benny's ears, her eyes focused on him instead of the vet or me. As we drove home, she finally spoke up, hesitating. Nate, I know you want to do everything for him, but do you think he's strong enough to go through all of that? The question hit me hard. I knew she was trying to be thoughtful, but it felt like she was giving up on him. Of course he is, Kayla. He's tough. He's still happy. He still wags his tail. Every time you walk in the door, he still loves his walks. If there's a chance we can get him back to that, why wouldn't we try? She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I'm just worried about how much he'll have to go through, that's all. Surgery, recovery, chemo, it's a lot for a dog, especially at his age. Look, I know it'll be hard, but it's worth it, isn't it? I don't think I can just let him go like this," I said, probably a little too sharply. Her face softened, and she nodded, letting it drop, but I could see the worry in her eyes. For the next few days, I threw myself into researching his treatment options, calling specialists, reading stories from other pet owners who'd gone through similar situations. It helped seeing how many people had given their dogs a second chance. I kept showing Kayla the stories, convinced that they'd change her mind. I wanted her to see what I saw, that Benny was strong, that he could beat this if we gave him the chance. But every time, she'd just listen quietly, nodding, maybe asking a few questions. It felt like she was humoring me more than anything, and it hurt. I'd catch her watching Benny when he was sleeping, her face soft but sad, like she was already grieving. One evening, as I was wrapping up yet another call with a specialist, she gently put her hand on my arm. "Nate, I know this is killing you, but maybe we need to think about how this will be for him. All the treatments, the side effects, the recovery. It's going to be hard on him." I shook my head. It's better than giving up on him. I'm not ready to say goodbye. Her eyes filled with tears. Neither am I, Nate. But what if this fight is just too much for him? What if trying to save him is actually hurting him? I took a breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. I knew she loved Benny too. I knew she wasn't just being practical. But every fiber of me felt like we couldn't just not try. I felt like if we didn't do everything possible, I'd be letting him down, failing him. He'd always been there for me. He'd given me so many good years, so much love and companionship. Didn't I owe it to him to give him a chance? Still, her words stayed with me, whispering doubts that made my chest ache. I wondered if I was only fighting so hard because I couldn't handle the idea of losing him. I wanted to believe it was for him, that he'd want me to fight for him, but I wasn't sure. After another sleepless night, I asked her to come with me to talk to the vet one more time. Maybe I needed an outside voice, someone who could see the situation clearly, without the love and pain clouding their judgment. The vet was compassionate, talking us through the whole process. She explained what Benny's treatment would entail, how the surgery would mean he'd need to relearn how to get around on 3 legs, and how chemotherapy could be hard for him. "It's always difficult with older dogs," she said. "Some respond well, and the time they get is good quality. But not all dogs take well to the treatments, especially at his age." Kayla looked at me with tears in her eyes, a silent question there, asking if I could handle it if this didn't go the way we wanted. I felt my own resolve start to crack. The vet looked at us both. "You two obviously love him deeply, and I don't think there's a wrong decision here. It's just a matter of what feels right for him and for you." Afterward, we took Benny to his favorite park, letting him sit in the sun and sniff the grass. And I watched him, his eyes closed, his nose twitching as he smelled the breeze. He looked so peaceful, so content just to be there with us. Kayla squeezed my hand. "This is what I want for him," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I want him to feel like this, not scared or in pain." It was one of those moments that cuts through everything. I wanted Benny to live, to be with us longer, but I didn't want to keep him alive just to watch him suffer. I realized I'd been clinging to the idea of saving him because I didn't want to face the alternative, but maybe that wasn't what was best for him. When we got home, I held him, pressing my forehead against his. His tail thumped softly, and he licked my face like he could sense something was weighing on me. I realized then that my love for him wasn't about keeping him here for me. It was about giving him peace, letting him go while he still felt like himself. So we decided not to go through with the treatment. We'd let him stay home, comfortable and loved, for as long as he had left. The next few weeks were filled with quiet moments, long naps on the couch, extra treats, and trips to the park. We spoiled him, watching for the slightest sign of discomfort, knowing that when the time came, we'd let him go peacefully in the home he'd always known. When the day finally came, I held him close as the vet came to the house. Kayla was there, her hand on my shoulder, her own tears falling silently as I whispered to Benny that he was a good boy, that he'd always been the best. He drifted off with his head in my lap, his breathing softening until it stopped. The silence felt unbearable, like the whole house suddenly felt his absence. Now, every morning when I wake up, I feel the space he left. I find myself looking for him in all the usual places, expecting his warm body curled up at the foot of the bed. I wonder if I did the right thing, if there was more I could have done. But I remind myself that I let him go the way he would have wanted, surrounded by love, without fear or pain. Still, that doubt lingers. Was I wrong to stop fighting? Did I give up too soon? Or was letting him go the kindest thing I could have done? AITA?